We're very chuffed to have you all with us. And I wanted to touch on a very important topic for every addicted family. Every addicted system has a codependent enabling network that allows the addiction to continue and rescues the addict from the consequences of their using and prevents them from assuming full responsibility for themselves and for their recovery. So it's a really crucial topic. Stella, will I just shout for the next slide?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. So I want to touch on the family disease and what is codependency, what treatment is and what treatment isn't, and whether you guys as family members are ready for change, whether you've truly exhausted all of your options and you're willing to make some changes for yourselves and for the families, because that's a critical point. If you're willing to make some changes, we'd love to be there to be able to help. Stella?
Yeah.
So there's many different definitions of codependency, and we'll get down to one that I prefer in a couple of slides, but this is quite a lengthy one. It speaks about an excessive emotional or psychological dependence on another person, typically in relationships where one person is affected by addiction. So there's an unhealthy dynamic. It's something that we learn as children as a part of a survival mechanism that worked when we were kids, that doesn't serve us and our loved ones well now. Stella? I'm just going to try to make this a bit bigger.
Okay.
So when there's an addict that's using in the family, the system gets sick because there's a feedback loop that feeds back into the system that keeps us all unwell. Rescuing the patient from their consequences enables the addiction to continue. Stress spreads through the house, roles distort and boundaries fail. It affects finances, time management, health, trust within the family, and families perpetuate the cycle of addiction without meaning to by fixing problems, by alleviating the consequences of the addict's behavior. They soften consequences, they promise to draw a boundary, they promise to hold a line, and then they fold, they capitulate, they don't hold the line. Arguing while the person is intoxicated is a complete waste of time, and policing sobriety instead of supporting the program. So the patients that complete secondary care with us, by and large, have the opportunity to complete a recovery contract with their loved one that clearly stipulates concrete, tangible, easily measured behaviors, because you need to be able to tell if your loved one is in recovery and how you measure that. It's not by what they say, by what they think, by what they feel. It's by their behavior. They either did certain things today or they didn't. So it's concrete. It's very easy to see. It's very easy to measure. There's no negotiation around it. I think that active addiction is filled with promises and wanting to do things and meaning to do things that never happen. Recovery is about easily measured behaviors. That's a very, very, very important point. So on the next slide. What helps us in treatment is working together with the family as a unified front. Any patient any severely addicted patient, some are particularly good at manipulation, others aren't. But if there's any chink in the armor, in the united front that the family and the treatment team presents, they will get a crowbar in there and maximize that gap into a bigger hole that they can utilize for the outcome that they want, which is to leave treatment and to start feeding their addiction again. It's very difficult for families to understand, much like the patients have to come to a full and complete, clear understanding that they're at the end of the road, that they've exhausted all of their options. They've tried everything they could to manage their addiction and to stop using. And a part of their acceptance of the fact that they've exhausted all of their options and they cannot get any better, once they've reached that point, that's really the only point at which they have an acute awareness of the nature of the problem and the severity of the problem. And it's only at that point that patients are willing to take responsibility for moving forward into healthy, good recovery behaviors. So very often patients will have a myriad of different excuses around how it's not the drugs, it's my depression, it's my anxiety, it's my bipolar, it's my childhood trauma, it's all sorts of other things. And we're very lucky to have on board Dr. Tia van der Merwe, who I think just joined the group. She's a fantastic psychiatrist who specializes in the treatment of addiction. So many psychiatrists that see addicted people don't realize that the active addiction blurs the picture. So the patient presents with depression, anxiety, bipolar, all sorts of psychiatric and mental health problems that will not get better until the addiction is dealt with. Often families ask, so what came first, the mental health disorder or the addiction? What comes first is the person. That's our first critical, foremost concern. And we have to treat those two issues concurrently. They must be treated together at the same time in a comprehensive treatment plan moving forward. So it's very important that, excuse me, that the team that treats your loved one has a good GP for detox, a good psychiatrist for mental health, psychologists, occupational therapists, social workers, registered counselors, addictions counselors. Each component of that team has a different input and opinion that goes in and contributes towards the treatment plan. So that treatment plan is negotiated and agreed upon with the patient and the patient's family, and it's not a document that's set in stone. It changes throughout the course of treatment. So there's a couple of good examples that I've left up on the screen for a while around what hurts and what helps. I love you. I'll support treatment. I'll support meetings and honest talk. I won't give you cash. I won't support addiction. So the other important thing to understand is that addiction isn't, relapse isn't an event, it's a process. So those concrete, tangible, easily measured behaviors that we spoke about being in the recovery contract, if your loved one isn't engaged in those behaviors, that means that the relapse process is underway. They may only physically pick up and drink and use at a certain point, which is really hard to determine when. But if those recovery behaviors aren't in place, then it's a matter of time until they pick up. So there's a fantastic program in Canada. It's the most successful addiction program in the world. It's for pilots. They've got a 98% success rate. And it's so good for several factors. One is that pilots and doctors and nurses who go on the program have invested a lot of time and money in qualifying. If they're caught impaired or intoxicated on the job, they're forced to enter the program, which dispels one of the biggest myths or misconceptions about addiction and its effective treatment. Most people believe that unless the patient is highly motivated and willing to engage in treatment, that treatment won't work. That's totally untrue. Most patients are forced, cajoled, squeezed, and pressured under some form of leverage into treatment, whether that's their parents, their wife, their boss, their loved ones, their employers. And those pilots and doctors and nurses who are forced into this program because they either go or they lose their job. If they lose their job, all that money and time invested in qualifying, what are they going to do? Go and start to restudy to become an architect, go and work as a waiter. Their choices are severely narrowed. So the leverage and the pressure to get them in is immense. And the pressure to keep them engaged long-term over 5 years is also immense. And that's another reason that program works so well, because it's long-term. There are plenty of quick, easy, simple solutions to addiction. Unfortunately, none of them are right. None of them work. None of them hold water. None of them work. So those doctors, and the point I wanted to make is that they are in quite an intensive monitored period. So at least a 28-day program of primary care, then 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6 months of a secondary care, and then at least until 1 year clean in a halfway house. When they reach the halfway house phase and moving forward for the next 5 years, they have a case manager who phones their psychiatrist, their therapist, their sponsor, their family, and one other point of contact that I can't remember now. So the psychiatrist therapist, family, and their 12-step sponsor once a week. That case manager has contact with them, makes notes, and keeps track of where they are. If the spouse has a concern, well, he was supposed to go to a meeting, but he was a bit sick for a second week in a row. He's making excuses about not going to therapy. The therapist says he doesn't pitch up. The wife says she's not sure that he's medication compliant. All of this feedback is really useful in early detection of the relapse. So these things are little red warning lights going off on the dashboard telling us that something's wrong. And so that program that's so successful is successful for those reasons. But a big one is that those medical professionals, pilots, they are leveraged, they're forced in, and they're forced through the 5-year program, which includes random urine testing. That's quite an intense process to go through. I think that what families sometimes think is the patient's the one with the problem. They're the one causing all of the chaos. Let's put them in treatment for 3 weeks and they'll be fine and dandy. Everything will be perfect after that. This problem of addiction isn't addressed quickly. It takes a comprehensive long-term approach. The relapse rates drop off significantly after 90 days and then again after 1 year. So we have to contain your loved one in some kind of treatment for at least a year. There's a friend of mine who's got a rehab in the States, and a part of their slogan is, let's be clear, it's a year. I think it sounds better in American, but keeping your loved one tethered to some kind of a treatment process for a year is really important. That might be something as simple as funds are sometimes an issue, and so the medical aids pay for 21 to 24 days. Maybe you can't afford them to go to secondary care. They're going to the halfway house. You can't afford the halfway house. They just come for outpatients. But coming for therapy, for one-on-one counseling, and in the outpatients and the aftercare and the living recovery, we have a full continuum of care going forward long-term. Please avail your loved one of that treatment. They desperately need it. People who end up in inpatient primary care, which is, it's one step below inpatient psychiatric care. It's not a mild little problem. Severe substance use costs people their lives all the time. I was at the secondary care last week, and the patients there, probably 2 or 3 years ago, painted a tree on the wall. And when they left, they would make a leaf and write their name and the date that they left in it, or their sobriety date. And what the staff did after a while was start to say, rest in peace, next to the people that had died. And I guarantee you, if we asked any patient population, any addicted patient population, look around the room, who do you think is going to be clean and sober and in recovery in 3 months or 3 years' time? Who do you think is going to be alive? Who do you think is going to be well? I think a part of our problem is that we have very poor insight into ourselves by ourselves. It's like my bald patch. I woke up this morning and I thought, that is a fantastic full head of hair. Magnificent. I got to work today. Sella was behind me. Said, Gareth, geez, have you seen your bald patch there? You're getting quite bald. So I can't see my bald patch without 3 mirrors or input from other people. Recovery is about living in consultation, and for families too. If you aren't living in consultation, if you think you know the approach, you know what to do, you've got all the answers, that's a very dangerous place to be. So we have, I can't see how many people are on here, but we have patients who come into treatment whose families never attend the family program. If they attend the conjoints, it's to haul their loved one over the coals and tell them how weak-willed they are, and they need to jack up their morals and come to church and pull their socks up, that it's a question of intellect or strength of character or willpower. This disease is much like high blood pressure, heart disease, and asthma. In fact, all 4 of those chronic illnesses, about 40 to 60% of the patients do not adhere to the treatment plan and need to be retreated time and time again. If your loved one has a relapse, that doesn't mean that treatment's failed. It means they need more help. And the boundaries around how they access that help is up to you. So I wonder how many of us in this group tonight have a couple of extra kilos on our bellies or our hips that we would like to lose. Weight control is a simple equation, generally, a simple equation of calories in and calories expended. I'm going to use that very simplistic example for now. Yes, we know today that sugar affects the same part of the brain as cocaine. People have all sorts of comorbid conditions that make weight loss very difficult. But in general, let's just say that weight loss, weight control is a simple matter of calories ingested and calories expended. Why haven't you lost the weight? Surely it's just a question of strength of character, willpower, or intellectual prowess. You just need to pull your socks up and get going. Human beings are complex creatures. It's not that simple. That's for weight control. Now throw in highly addictive drugs that change the brain chemistry. You can go to the next slide, please, Stella. Once a person becomes addicted, the brain has undergone structural and functioning changes. There are parts of the brain, if we took a brain scan of your loved one and a brain scan of myself or Cello, or yourself too, hopefully, the disease of addiction affects the brain's memory, reward, stress. It affects different circuits. And once you're addicted, some of those components have actually changed shape. The brain structure and the brain functioning has changed. So it affects the limbic system, which is at the base of your skull here. And we used to believe that crocodiles are all limbic systems. Their entire brain is a limbic. We now know it's a little more complex, but the limbic system controls your drive for sex, food, water. Once you're addicted, the brain overrides that. And addicted people, severely addicted people, will choose drugs over water, food, sleep, sex. So that's the power of the addiction, of the brain disease that your loved ones has. They are driven. There's a mental obsession. They're obsessed to get and use and find ways and means to get more, and a physical compulsion to get and use more. So if you consider those couple of kilos that you'd love to lose and how difficult it's been for you, your loved one's facing an uphill battle. It's not a battle that comes right quickly or easily. Some of the red flags that you're sliding back on your boundaries is if you explain your boundary more than once. So let's say Cello didn't like being hugged, and every morning I come into work and I give him a big hug. And he says, Gareth, I'm not too comfortable with that. I really don't like it. Can we stop? And I continue to do it. Do you think Cello needs to keep explaining himself, saying, Gareth, please don't hug me. Please don't hug me. Explain your boundary once and then have a consequence for that behavior. If you feel urgent pressure to fix their problem immediately, if you change the rules, if you capitulate on your boundary after tears and anger and trauma and strife and guilt, those are big red flags. Next slide, please, Sella. Okay, so this is a critical slide. I'd love you guys to really get extra points in the test we're going to run after this for the slide. Codependency has these factors, and they're critical factors that families learn to stop doing. Family members are enmeshed and overly involved. So frequently what happens if one of our colleagues did a conjoint last week, and towards the end of the conjoint, the patient had left to rejoin the patient community, and the counselor said something to the mother. And the mother said, you've got to go and tell him that now. You've got to go and tell him. He's got to hear that. So generally the codependent in the family, the most extreme one is mom, and that's just the way it is. Moms are loving and nurturing and caring, and that's their core role with their babies and their children. With codependency, that extends too far and too long. If we had a magical set of words that we could wave in front of your loved one's face that would make them see sense, we wouldn't need treatment centers. They would just need a session. I've done about 200 interventions, and very often the families think that by employing me to come to the home and hearing all of the history and the trauma and what this person's done and learning about their addiction and the family dynamics and all the data I need to do the intervention, that I will then be able to wave a magical set of words in front of their face that will make the problem go away. It really doesn't work like that. So this expressed emotion, over-involvement, it's a high-risk family pattern linked to poor outcomes in mental disorders. Emotional over-involvement is that mom at the end of the conjoint thinking she knows what her son needs. You've just told me something that's meaningful for me. It's really useful in my experience of my son being in treatment and my codependency and what's going on for me. You must go and give this nugget to them. They need this. I know what they need. You must rush off and give this to them as though that's somehow going to change things. Not only is the treatment for the patient very different to the treatment for the families, if you know what your loved one needs, they wouldn't need to be in treatment. Your means and efforts and capabilities and all of your everything that you could do would have got them well. And that's a critical point. We'll come down to the last slide in a couple of minutes where have you guys really realized that you've exhausted all of your options? Do you think there's still some magical, special, something you can do that's going to fix them, take away their need to drink and use in the way that they are, make their depression better, that's somehow magically going to make things better? So there are several things that research shows us families can do that help your loved one get into recovery and stay in recovery, and several things you can do that keep them in addiction. Sometimes in extreme cases, the codependent has to keep the patient sick. Their life would be too upset and in turmoil, and they would have to look at their stuff if the patient got well. So it's quite sad. In some cases, the codependent keeps the patient sick. They do not want them to get well. They sabotage treatment. They'll do anything to get them back out there. So some of us are sicker than others. There was a Professor George Valent in the 90s. He was chair of psychiatry at Harvard, and the research that he did showed 4 common denominators amongst people who attain long-term stable recoveries. They are reinforcing behavior, inspirational group membership, compulsory supervision, and bonds with people that they haven't hurt in the past. So all 4 of those factors are present in 12-step recovery. Reinforcing behavior is the patient going to a 12-step group instead of going to happy hour in the evening. It's no mistake that the AA meetings are scheduled at a certain time of night, so people leave work and instead of going to the bar or some other unhealthy activity, they go to a meeting. So that's called reinforced behavior. Inspirational group membership is fairly self-explanatory. Compulsory supervision is sponsorship. So having a sponsor who oversees my recovery, that I text at the end of the day and say, I woke up and I asked for help, I prayed, I meditated, I went to a meeting, I spoke to a sponsee, I did all of these recovery behaviors. I did a step 10 at the end of the day. I made a gratitude list, all of these concrete, tangible, easily measured recovery behaviors. Guys, I bang on about them all the time because they're so important. So that's compulsory supervision, is the sponsor. And the key thing for you guys, the B, is bonds with people they haven't hurt in the past. Very often family members want to be over-involved in their loved one's recovery process. You're not the closest people for them in recovery. If you are, that's a huge problem. That means they're not going to get well. You need to be able to stand back. Sometimes with families, I want to try to sum it up as simply as I can. And a couple of weeks ago, I nearly said to a family in a conjoint, leave him alone. Just leave him alone. Let him stand in his own 2 feet. Leave him alone. So this over-involvement, this enmeshment is super dysfunctional, unhealthy, and doesn't allow the patient to get better. If he's always had the bar, if he's doing a chest press, you've always lifted it up, you've helped him a little bit. How's he going to get strong? How's he going to stand on his own 2 feet? The best gift you could give your loved one who has an addiction is the privilege of their problems. Let them deal with their problems. Stop rescuing. Stop fixing it all. Let them feel the consequences of their behavior. So over-involvement and enmeshment are both associated with loss of autonomy. So you're taking away your loved one's personal power. Of course, there's blurred boundaries because they should be an independent, standalone, unique individual, and you're impeding that. And poorer clinical outcomes. So people don't get well when you get involved, overly involved. We need you involved. But that over-involvement doesn't serve anybody's best interest, least of all your loved one. It maintains the family dysfunction. And by saying your family is dysfunctional, my family puts the funk back in dysfunctional. It's not an insult. It's not a judgment. It's not a criticism. It's a useful term. It's something that we can use to sum up a set of behaviors. I'm 32 years clean and sober. I don't often talk about this. I joined the wonderful world of drugs and alcohol at the age of 13 and cleaned up at 21. The last year of my using, I lived in Tembisa Township, getting shot at by the good guys and the bad guys. It wasn't pretty. One of the critical things that got me in the township, got me living on the streets and then moving in with my drug dealer, was that my father said, enough. He kicked me out. I couldn't go there. I couldn't write. I couldn't call. I couldn't send a telex. I couldn't send a courier pigeon. It was over. My mom had enmeshed, enabled, and squeezed me along as long as she could. My dad said, enough's enough, it's over. Kicked me out. So there was something else I wanted to say there around families and enmeshment, but it'll come back to me. Stella, will you give us the next slide? Thank you. So these are the different kinds. I'm going to whip through the next 6 or 8 slides because I really want to leave some time at the end for you guys to ask more specific questions. So there's 4 different kinds of enabling coming up. And perhaps they should be called fear-based manipulation and guilt-based manipulation, because these are things your loved one does in active addiction to try to manipulate you to not squeeze them into taking responsibility. So the addict makes threats. They blame the family for becoming addicted. You weren't there for me. You should have done better. Next slide, Stella. So I'll go to rehab next week, just one last time. I've got that big job interview. It's Christmas. Give me a little more time. It's Johnny's birthday. It's our son's birthday. It's our wedding anniversary. Please, sweetheart, can't be in rehab for that. Do you really love me? Come on, darling. It's our wedding anniversary. So the other one, in an addict's mind, nothing is their fault. Sorry, just go back one. Stella, yeah. So I think someone's on the group tonight so addicts are masters of shape-shifting, of moving blame, not taking responsibility. And families, the codependent in the family is a master at falling in the traps that they lay. So I'm having a rough time because, all the patients I was very close to in treatment, the bulk of them have moved on to the next phase of treatment. So it's really been hard for me. Mom falls right in the hole. Oh my God, my darling boy, this is what's causing this bad behavior. Isn't it amazing how he was so well connected to his peers and he was doing so well? And look at how this has upset him. This is an indication of how well he was connected and how well he's doing. No, it's just another trap. It's just another pitfall that they lay for you. It's like landmines along your path. They're going to lay the landmines for you. And if you fall into them, they're not going to get well. So the critical work for you guys as family is learning about codependency, what your triggers are, what motivates you to be codependent, learning about addiction and manipulation, how to hold them accountable and responsible, and not stepping on the landmines. If you continue to step on the landmines and fall in the pit holes, they're not going to get well. So if you had the childhood trauma that I did, you're drinking using the way that I do. If you had the stress of my job, if you had the drama queen of a mother that I do, you would also drink in the way that I drink. I wouldn't be using drugs if I didn't have that childhood trauma, if I didn't have my bipolar, my anxiety, depression, attention deficit, that accident I was in that lost my leg. That's why I drink and use, and so any old excuse. Next slide, please, Stella. So this one again, this is something that you should all be very familiar with. So I'm not going to go through it all. You should have heard lots of this prior to treatment. And it's a huge warning sign and a big red flag, warning sign on the dashboard, or a fire, smoke coming from underneath the bonnet if you're hearing this stuff again. We can make a copy of this available if you want to scrutinize it a little closer. And the copy of this family group will be up on YouTube in a couple of weeks. Next slide, please, Cello. Okay, so these next two slides are important because these are the 4 core behaviors that codependents, the 4 different types of codependence. And if you understand your core belief, it'll better enable you to understand the behaviors, the costs, and what needs to happen for you to have a healthy shift. So the core belief of the enabler is if I fix things, they'll be okay. So you cover up, you pay for things, you rescue, you say yes when you should say no. This drains yourself, which I think is the least recognizable consequence for codependence, because myself doesn't really matter. I have to take care of everybody else. But the critical thing is that it shields the addiction from consequences and the patient from taking responsibility for changes. So it can either slow change or stop change. The controller, if I manage everything, nothing will go wrong. So you monitor, direct traffic, micromanage, argue, police, set, trapdoors and backdoors, and just do everything you can to hypervigilant control everything. This results in high anxiety, power struggles, and your loved one learns nothing. Very often, if the family doesn't make changes, the addict has no reason to make changes. They're not going to change. Why would they? I've said a handful of times over the years, I've worked in the field about 28 years now, and I've said probably 5 or 6 times in a conjoint to the mother or the wife, can I move in? Can I move in and not work or work poorly, not contribute, lie around drinking and using all day? Would you put up with that? It's because it's a fantastic life. Can I just move in and have that? And of course they say no, which is appropriate. And that's the answer they should be giving to their loved one. Because should you choose to not change this behavior, you slow change or you stop change. Stella? People pleaser. If everyone's happy, I'm safe. Avoid conflict, over apologize, agree, and overcommit. Low self-respect, quiet resentment bubbling and boiling under the surface, and unclear boundaries. The martyr. My suffering proves my love. Does everything, never rests, keeps score, guilt trips. Next slide, Stella. So treatment, critically, I want you guys to have a core understanding of what we do in treatment and what we don't do. So the daily structure in treatment helps to renormalize sleeping and eating patterns. It helps people to just get back into a healthier routine. So the nurse will wake them up at 6:30. Their first group is at 6:30. They need to be showered and dressed and presentable as though they're going to work or some kind of a functioning event. They need to have their files with them or their literature. That core structure just helps to rebuild a sense of normality. Therapy builds insight, the accountability anchors change. The detox is the easiest part of treatment. That's the easiest part of treatment. So we have I did an assessment yesterday of a mother whose 20-year-old son is injecting methamphetamine. And she said, oh my God, what if my darling boy comes into treatment and meets a heroin addict? A heroin addict. So families are always concerned about the type of population that their loved one's going to be mixing with. And trust me, they've mixed with much worse out there on the streets. They're drinking and using with these people anyway. Coming into treatment's the best thing that they can do. But the detox is the easiest part of treatment. Getting down to underlying causes and conditions, the reasons as to how and why your loved one has become addicted and what they need to do to begin to take some responsibility for moving forward is really crucial. So we explore triggers and thinking errors and relationship patterns, and we try to get them to practice honesty and responsibility. If you guys stand in our way and allow them to get away with dishonesty and not taking responsibility, our hands are tied. It comes a point when we can only push so much, they leave our care and they go back to a dysfunctional system that allows them to continue being dishonest and not be accountable. Then the outcome is very poor. So the goal of treatment is stabilization for ongoing work. Treatment is not a cure and it's not a fix. It's the first initial foundation. The discharge marks the start of a sustained recovery effort. Discharge isn't the end of the road. Next slide, Cello. Treatment is not instant change. 21 days do not undo years of conditioning. We lay a foundation, don't deliver final result. We're not external control. So we equip the person, and as much as we do control in primary care, and then less and less so as treatment moves on through secondary care and tertiary care. So we control them through 24-hour security, 24-hour nursing, internal systems that monitor them and keep control of them. But it's not something that you can't have a bodyguard with your loved one 24/7. One of the initial people who helped to found Alcoholics Anonymous in the 30s came from a very rich family, and he couldn't stop drinking. So he was sent to Freud in Switzerland for a year, spent a year there, and Freud said, fantastic, you've done all the work, it's been a year, you can go back home to America. And he was face down drunk on the carpet on the train on the way back to Paris, couldn't stay clean. On the boat on the way home, he considered killing himself because he thought, I'm such a hopeless, useless turkey. What a donkey of a man. I can't even stop drinking. And he got home, and there's a long story about how he helped to start the 12 steps. But when he got back to Freud, because he went back and he said, listen, Freud said, I thought I had given you enough treatment. I thought that you were an alcoholic, and the treatment I gave you was appropriate for being an alcoholic. I didn't know that you were an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. And what you can do throughout the history of time, there have been events, but it's kind of like being struck by lightning. There are people across the history of time that have these religious conversions, these spiritual awakenings. They have this moment of clarity, but it's kind of like being struck by lightning. I don't know how to engender it. I don't know how to give it to you. I can't give it to you. I thought you were an alcoholic, but you're an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. There's nothing that modern medicine or science can do for you. What you can do is go home and hire a bodyguard, and the bodyguard can keep you from drinking as much as he can until you drink yourself to death. So external controls don't work. Interpol is not going to stop your loved one from getting and using and finding ways and means to get more. Treatment is not a guarantee without continued work. The outcomes improve when the home environment, when what you guys do support the program. Our alignment matters. We have to sing from the same hymn sheet. Sella? So in treatment, in primary care, we are very busy and we try to achieve many, many things. Detox, stabilization, psychiatric care, trauma work. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. It's busy and there's a lot to do. But underlying all of that, in my mind, my overriding goal for patients in primary care is that they have an acute awareness of the nature of the problem and the severity of the problem, because it's only at that point that they have an acute awareness that the nature of the problem is not my depression, anxiety. It's not my psychiatric condition, my mental health, my childhood trauma, my codependent mother, the stress of my job, my father being too hard on me. I'm too poor. I'm too rich. I'm too tall. I'm too short. We won the rugby. We lost the rugby. They've got a smorgasbord, a plethora of different reasons as to how and why they drink and use. The nature of the problem is that I'm a drug addict. And what drug addicts do is continue to drink and use. If I understand that and I have a full gut level, complete acceptance of the fact that I have an addiction problem, yes, that means I see my psychiatrist and I take my medication and I do all of the other healthy things I need to do. But someone who has a full and complete understanding of the fact that they're allergic to strawberries doesn't eat strawberries. So once I have a full and complete understanding of the fact that I'm a drug addict, I have that acute awareness of the nature of the problem and the severity of the problem, that it's that bad. Once we've achieved those two things, it's only at that point that people realize I've exhausted, I've shot this all 9,000 ways I can possibly perceive shooting this. I've had a day job where I have to wear a suit and tie, and I try to drive a car there and sit in the cage of a car instead of ride a motorcycle and slip between the cars on the white line. I will just drink and smoke. I won't shoot. I will just use the pharmaceuticals. I won't use street drugs. People carve it up all 9,000 ways they can possibly perceive to manage the problem. Once they've realized they've exhausted their efforts and there's nothing they can do to stop the problem, then they're ready to get better. And I have to pose the same question to you guys. Have you exhausted all of your efforts, or do you still think you know better? Do you still think you know? I think, because I wonder if we could have a show of hands somehow. I know you can do it on Zoom, but if we could have a show of hands of how many of you have read the family pack that got sent out? Read it completely. How many of you have been to 3 Al-Anon groups, 3 Nar-Anon groups, 3 tough love groups? How many of you started therapy? How many of you really had a look at your codependency, your family dynamics, how it contributes towards this, your loved one's addiction? Things that you're doing are keeping them sick. They've contributed towards the addiction, and unless you stop them, you're going to contribute towards a relapse. So have you done all those things? Did you scrutinize the family pack and go to meetings and go to therapy and ask for help? And have you run down this path until you're exhausted and you're convinced that you need help? Or the addict's the problem. They're in treatment. I'll attend a couple of family groups. We're going to Nar-Anon and Al-Anon, tough love, and all of that other nonsense. So the problem with codependency is that our intentions feel loving, but the effect of our behavior removes responsibility from the person who must change. So I would strongly encourage you guys to do that work. Find out what you're doing that enables addiction, enables relapse, doesn't empower recovery. I'm just going to mute everybody. Hang on. So if you guys don't, again, as the patient needs an acute awareness of their problem and how they can change it, you need an acute awareness of the nature of your codependency, how things have come about, what you do to enable the addiction, and what you're going to do to empower change, how you're going to support recovery. If you're not that serious, the outcome for your loved one is going to be diminished. That's just the reality of it. And I think sometimes the team, I listen to them on the phone, to you guys as families, they're very gentle. They're very gentle. I'm not trying to be rude or harsh or critical or judgmental, but this is a message that families have to hear. You're contributing towards the illness. How are you going to contribute towards the recovery? So codependency maintains the addiction. You guys, it's really important that you hear that and that stops. I really can't say much more about it. So what I wanted to say about my dad in my late teens that kicked me out and my codependence enabling mom, every time I was booked into a 10-day detox or treatment, the admission staff would ask, is there a family history of addiction? And my mother, horrified, would say no. My father would say no. My mum comes from a family where her father was he bred racehorses, and they've got an old book in Dublin that goes back 400 years, and the boys were either priests or lawyers. So he became a lawyer, and he bred racehorses. Two of them won the Grand National. Good family, good middle class, good family. And that's what I grew up knowing. That's what I grew up thinking and visiting. And I felt like an alien. I felt like if a spaceship came down in the parking lot and these little aliens said, Gareth, get your things, it's time to go home, it would all make sense because my behavior was so offsides. It was so, I loved my family and I hated what I was doing to them. I felt so deeply guilty and ashamed and disgusted at myself for what I was doing. I had 4 different high schools. They kept inviting me to leave. I don't know about the high schools that you were at, but at my high schools, you had to pitch up at 7:45 in the morning, be stone cold sober, and you couldn't sell drugs to the other kids. I think they were just stifling my entrepreneurial spirit, really. So booked into treatment. It was only about 3 months ago. My dad died last year. And my mum said that her father's mother, so my paternal grandmother, didn't talk to him from the age of 24 for the rest of his life. I said, well, that's quite extreme. What happened? He qualified at law and he got his first job, and the client gave him money to pay for the job. He put all the money on the horses, lost the bet. And for your first job, first client, that's not particularly good. So the family had to bail him out and give him the money, which I think they gave straight to the company so the company could do the work. That sounds like a gambling addiction to me. And about 3 months ago, she told me that her paternal grandfather, she thinks, she's not sure, but she thinks he died, he fell drunk into a fire and burned to death. That sounds like alcoholism to me. So the family ability to be in denial is sometimes stronger than the patient's ability to be in denial. I didn't know any of these things until 6 or 3 months ago. So codependency maintains the addiction. You guys have got to find out what you have to change. It's not about your loved one. Leave them alone. Let them stand up. Let them bear the weight. Let them feel the consequences of their choices. Let them do what they need to do. It's 52. What's the next slide, Silla? So these are some things to ponder. I want you guys to take a screenshot or a picture or just read through them. I can send out the PowerPoint if you want it. Think about when last you rescued them from a consequence. How do you help them? That isn't help. It removes their responsibility. What are you doing for them they should be doing for themselves? What are you going to do this week for your own recovery, for your own well-being? What in your home makes using and drinking easier? What in your home makes recovery easier? What will I stop doing that makes the addiction comfortable? Next slide, Silla. Guys, if you want to type your questions in the comments, or we'll have a couple of minutes now just to chat about it. If you want to stay late for a few minutes, we can also do that if Cello can head home. I know you've got a bus to catch. You've got an appointment. So early on in codependent recovery, doing these new behaviors feels wrong. Just because it feels wrong doesn't mean it isn't right. And just because it feels right doesn't mean it isn't without risk. Cutting off your loved one, not taking their calls, not providing shelter, food and accommodation and airtime and petrol and transport, and those things have risks. But you're either standing on the train track and just going to allow the status quo to continue until the train hits you, or you're going to make some changes and leverage them into taking responsibility. I don't think there were any questions typed in the comments. If you guys want to unmute yourselves and ask any final questions. There's a hand raised. Sella and I aren't too technologically advanced. I don't know who you were that raised your hand. Please feel free to speak up. So that's just more manipulation, it sounds to me like. This is not my rock bottom. You need to let go and you need to stand off and just let me continue to crash. Is that what the pilots and doctors and nurses get in their program? Are they just allowed to continue to crash and kill patients and crash planes? No, they're leveraged, forced, cajoled, and squeezed into treatment and squeezed into healthy behavior. And that's your responsibility as families. So some families go as far as getting a court order. So your loved one is legally has to attend treatments and cannot leave treatment. They will be arrested and brought back to treatment. So it's really about, I guess, a cascading set of consequences that even if they don't choose to get well, the consequences keep rolling in across time, and it just gets worse and worse for them. The pressure mounts and you leverage them in the right direction. It's almost like me standing on top of a very tall building and you're behind me. Sorry, I can't see your name. It just says Zoom user. And you're standing behind me and I'm saying all sorts of things that suicidal people say before they're going to die. Do you let me jump or do you try to pull me back? You try to pull me back because you hope that in the morning, in a couple of weeks, with some help and treatment and a fresh day, I'm going to see things differently. You don't just let me jump because I have to let go. I have to let go and stand back and let them hit their own rock bottom. That's absolute nonsense. That's non-responsibility. What your loved one is doing is just manipulation. You need to let go, Mom. You heard in those family groups. Codependents need to let go. You know what that's about, Mom. It's about you and your stuff, and you aren't letting go. It's just manipulation. Squeeze them into accountability. Squeeze them into different behavior. You can stand idly by on the train track and wait for the train, or you can do something different.
Gareth, there is a question just on the chat box, but it's more about Gareth. Thank you so much. Harsh, but so real. We needed to hear this. Tell me more about this family pack. Where can I get it from? Thanks.
The family pack gets emailed to everybody on admission. Everybody gets it.
Okay.
I saw your comment and I made a note of your name, and I'll find that sent email in the morning. Please send Tanya an email in the meantime. If it went to your spam folder, perhaps, everybody gets it. Does this method apply to sex and porn addicts as well? I'm asking because I haven't found support groups specific to that for loved ones. This is obviously a broad spectrum approach to addiction. Yes. So for process addiction, the same rules hold true. There is a SAA, Sex Addicts Anonymous, and really, so through my experience, sex addicts men should be attending Sex Addicts Anonymous and women should be attending Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. We have different chemicals and different responses to sex addiction, and ensure that he goes to, if it's a male, I think you said it's your husband, he must go to SAA and Sex Addicts Anonymous. SAA has online family support groups. Please attend them. Yeah. Questions, queries, concerns. If you want to chat about your specific loved one or a current issue, Sarah, I know that you need to head, so if you need to roll for your appointment, you can do that. I will close up. Thank you. Sex Addicts Anonymous family support groups. So there's S-Anon, which is support for families, friends, and spouses of sex addicts. I know there was a group, I think in Cape Town. So there's also atsac.org.uk, support for partners of those with sexual addiction. And I know there's SAA family support groups that are very infrequent here. And when they start, they tend to collapse. They don't tend to be long lasting, but you can attend them via Zoom every day, I'm sure. And if you send Tanya an email again, Tanya, Tanya at changesrehab.coza, and just say that you asked for some links. I'll find them for you and I'll get them back to you. But a simple Google search will show them. Pleasure. Okay, guys, I hope you gained some insights or some new info or knowledge. I'm going to close up now. Please. Okay, my son has been an alcoholic since 16 and an addict since 23. He's 43. He's been in recovery and relapse on and off all these years. That's very common. So, do you know the average amount of attempts the average heroin addict needs to make to stop using is 7. So the average heroin addict in the UK 20 years ago, when I saw this research, had to try 7 times to successfully quit using heroin. The average person who tries to quit nicotine has to try 9 times before they quit. So it's important to keep going. I think in his case, there's something that he's doing that he needs to learn to stop doing, or something he's not doing that he needs to learn to start doing. And also, he's 43. Is he functioning and working and doing well? Or is he living in your back room and you're feeding him? Because he's never going to clean up while he's staying in your back room and you're feeding him. You give him some money for airtime and petrol, or he walks around all day scurrying to try to make a plan to get drugs. He will never clean up.